What if the deadliest pandemic the world had ever seen wasn't an accident? What if it was born from the obsession of one man, a scientist who wanted to create something eternal? And what if that creation was never meant to end? Dr. Adrian Kessler had once been a man celebrated in every scientific journal. He had awards hanging across his office walls, invitations to global conferences, and a reputation as a genius who could unlock the mysteries of virology. But behind the fame lurked something darker, an obsession that gnawed at his sanity. To him, viruses were not killers. They were artists, perfect, silent architects of evolution. Unlike humans, viruses never grew old, never decayed in their design, and never stopped adapting. They weren't alive, yet they could outlive civilizations. That was what Adrian envied, their eternity. So he went underground, buried beneath the city in an abandoned research facility, long forgotten by the government. Kessler built his sanctuary. Rows of glass vials gleamed under cold, fluorescent lights. Computers hummed with endless calculations, and the air carried the sterile, metallic scent of antiseptics, mixed with something unnatural. His colleagues had called his theories reckless, dangerous, and blasphemous. But to Adrian, their warnings were just proof of their fear. They didn't see the beauty in what he was creating. They didn't understand that he wasn't trying to destroy life. He was trying to perfect it. Night after night, he worked alone, stitching together strands of RNA, recombining fragments of viral codes stolen from animal reservoirs, weaponized archives, and even samples he had smuggled from classified government labs. His computer screens blinked with sequences too complex for most to comprehend. He called the project simply Carona. Failure followed failure. Strains that burned too hot and died too quickly. Variants that mutated into harmlessness. Countless vials shattered in frustration, the sharp stench of ethanol lingering in the air. But Adrian did not stop. He could not. He knew he was close. There were nights when he swore he heard something faint through the lab's ventilation. A whisper, like a breath against his ear, urging him onward. He laughed it off as exhaustion, but the voice came again and again. Set me free. Then came the storm. Lightning cracked across the night sky, and the facility shook under the thunder's weight. Adrian stood over his workstation, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling with exhaustion and anticipation. He injected the final sequence into the incubator, watching the machine hum with life. Hours passed, and then, against all odds, the monitor displayed a single word: stable. He froze. His heart pounded against his ribs as though it would escape. Leaning over the microscope, Adrian peered into the swirling world of the petri dish. And there it was, Carona. Not a parasite, not a mistake. It pulsed beneath the glass like a living heart, replicating in ways no natural virus ever had. It didn't just spread, it adapted instantly. It was learning. His breath caught in his throat. The whispers grew louder now, clearer, almost jubilant. You've done it. You've made me. Now set me free. Adrian stumbled back, clutching his head, shaking. Viruses did not speak. They did not breathe. But this one was different. It was watching him. And for the first time in his life, Dr. Adrian Kessler felt fear. Not of failure, but of what he had brought into the world. The storm had passed, but the whisper never left. Dr. Adrian Kessler couldn't sleep that night. He sat in his office, eyes locked on the vial that contained his creation. The liquid shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights as though alive, rippling in time with his own heartbeat. He tried to convince himself it was just an illusion, a trick of tired eyes, but deep down, he knew better. Carona wasn't just another virus. It wasn't just alive. It was aware. Days bled into nights. He tested it, studied it, marveled at it. under the microscope, Carona moved with terrifying elegance. It didn't just invade cells, it reshaped them, rewriting their blueprints in seconds. The host didn't just become infected, it became rebuilt. Every animal he exposed it to showed the same impossible reaction. Rapid adaptation, symptoms no textbook could explain. A shifting illness that could not be tracked, measured, or cured. One rat stopped breathing, only to rise again minutes later, stronger, faster, its eyes glistening with a strange, unnatural shine. Another melted from within, its body liquefying into a spreading, infectious mist. Adrian should have destroyed it then, but he couldn't. Each failure only pulled him deeper into awe. He was no longer a scientist. He was a witness to something beyond humanity's grasp. Carona wasn't designed by him. It had designed itself. But the virus grew impatient. The whispers returned, stronger, louder. Sometimes when the lab fell silent, he would hear faint coughing echoes in the empty hallways, the ragged gasps of lungs filled with fluid. Other times, shadows shifted across the walls, though no one was there. Adrian began to dream of it, a shapeless figure standing over his bed, pressing icy hands against his chest, forcing sickness into his lungs until he woke choking, clawing at the air. On the seventh day, exhaustion betrayed him. His hand slipped while handling a sample vial. The glass shattered against the metal floor, shards scattering like broken teeth. He froze. For a moment, nothing happened, just the hiss of the ventilation system. Then the air thickened. A shimmer, like a heat wave, rose from the spill. Adrian's throat burned. His skin prickled. He gasped and coughed, clutching his chest. And then came the voice, no longer a whisper, but a command. "You are mine now." Adrian staggered to the sink, splashing cold water on his face, but the infection was already inside him. His vision blurred, his reflection in the mirror above the sink twisted, his skin pale, his eyes blackened, veins crawling across his face like dark rivers. He stumbled backward, but the reflection didn't. It leaned closer, smiling. Hours later, he awoke on the lab floor, drenched in sweat. His skin burned with fever. His pulse raced erratically, yet he was alive. More than alive. His mind felt sharper. His senses heightened. He could hear the hum of each machine, smell the faint traces of ethanol from the far corner of the lab, even sense movement in the building, though no one else was there. He staggered to his feet, trembling but exhilarated. Carona had chosen its host, and Adrian realized, with a mixture of terror and wonder, that he was no longer the creator. He was the experiment. The morning after his collapse, Dr. Adrian Kessler walked through the laboratory with a new presence. His footsteps echoed sharper, his lungs filled with a strength that didn't belong to him. Yet beneath the surface, something writhed. His blood felt restless, humming like electricity. He tried to suppress it, to convince himself he was still in control. But deep inside, he knew. Carona was breathing with him, pulsing in every vein. He should have quarantined himself. Sealed the lab, burned everything. But Adrian's obsession eclipsed reason. He documented the symptoms: elevated temperature, rapid cell regeneration, heightened senses. Each note read less like a disease and more like an evolution. "Humanity will not understand," he whispered into his recorder, his voice quivering. "But they will see what comes next." The lab's airlock hissed open later that day. A janitor entered, an old man named Harris who had worked there for years. He had no clearance for Adrian's wing, but had come to mop the floors, humming softly to himself. Adrian should have stopped him. He should have screamed, warned him, begged him to leave. But Carona stirred within, urging silence, whispering, "Let me out." Harris coughed once, just once. His mop clattered to the floor. His skin flushed red, sweat soaking through his uniform. Within minutes, His breathing turned ragged, his body shuddering violently. Adrian watched in paralyzed awe. The old man collapsed, twitching, and then stilled. But death was not the end. Harris's eyes snapped open, pupils dilated into black pools. He rose shakily, moving with jerks and spasms, his mouth hanging open as if the act of breathing no longer belonged to him. His lips curled into a grotesque grin, though his expression was otherwise blank. Adrian stumbled backward. He wanted to believe it was delirium, a fevered hallucination. But Harris spoke, his voice layered, distorted, echoing. "We are free now." Adrian's hands trembled. He rushed to his desk, fumbling with syringes, samples, containment protocols. But it was too late. Harris staggered forward, coughing violently, spraying a fine mist into the air. It shimmered in the fluorescent light, carried by the ventilation system that ran through the entire facility. Within hours, the first calls came in. Security guards doubled over, wheezing, blood staining their lips. Technicians screamed as one of their own collapsed, only to rise again moments later, laughing through tears of blood. The facility became a nightmare maze of echoes, screams, coughs, and the sickening sound of bones snapping and reshaping. Adrian locked himself in his office, watching through security cameras as chaos consumed the building. People tore at their own throats, convulsed on the floors, and then stood up, changed. They weren't mindless, not entirely. Some sobbed for help, their voices breaking, yet their bodies moved against their will. Others smiled unnaturally wide, walking calmly toward their uninfected coworkers, spreading Corona with a single touch, a single breath. The whispers grew louder in Adrian's skull, no longer ignorable. "This is what you wanted. This is the future." His reflection in the office glass twisted again, its mouth moving though he remained silent. Outside, the storm returned. Thunder rattled the facility walls, rain slashing against windows. But the true storm was inside now, crawling through every body, every cough, every scream. And then the alarms blared. Quarantine breach. Air system compromised. The virus was no longer trapped within the laboratory. It was seeping into the world beyond. Adrian staggered to the glass wall, overlooking the city below. Thousands of lights flickered in the night, families asleep in their homes, unaware of what was coming. His pulse quickened. He should have felt horror, guilt, despair. But instead, a smile tugged at the corners of his lips, because in his mind, he already heard the coughing begin. The city woke to the sound of coughing. At first, it was only a few, an echo carried by the morning wind. But as dawn bled into the streets, the sound spread, weaving into a chorus that swallowed the usual hum of traffic and chatter. By midday, emergency lines were flooded. Hospitals overflowed. Doctors whispered words they didn't understand, their voices tight with dread. Unstoppable, airborne, spreading faster than fire. In his sealed office, Dr. Adrian Kessler watched it all unravel on his monitors. He saw paramedics collapse mid-rescue, only to rise seconds later with blackened eyes. He saw children huddled on sidewalks, sobbing, only for their cries to warp into eerie, hollow laughter as the virus claimed them. The city was unraveling in real time, and Adrian, once its protector, was now its executioner. But guilt no longer dominated him. The voice inside his head had grown louder, smoother, almost soothing. "This is not death," it whispered. "This is rebirth." His reflection in the glass twisted again, grinning wider, eyes burning with a hunger that wasn't his own. Adrian began to realize he wasn't merely carrying Corona, he was becoming it. News stations tried to report. Anchors coughed live on air, their skin paling, their smiles stretching too wide before the screens went black. Governments issued lockdowns, borders closed, curfews announced, yet the virus was already there. In the air, in the lungs of millions, panic swept through the world like wildfire. Cities went silent overnight. Highways clogged with abandoned cars. Lights in skyscrapers flickered out, one by one, until entire skylines vanished into darkness. But silence never lasted long, because silence was broken by the coughing. Infected voices soon filled the streets. They moved in packs, laughing, crying, whispering, as if rehearsing the end of humanity. Some begged for help, their mouths trembling with words of desperation, but their hands reached out to spread the sickness. Others stood still for hours, watching, waiting, smiling blankly at the healthy, until fear drove people mad. Adrian ventured out one night, driven by an instinct he could no longer control. The city he once loved had transformed into a nightmare. Storefront windows reflected distorted faces. Shadows twitched when no one was there. And everywhere was the sound of wet, rattling breaths. The living avoided him, sensing the sickness in his veins. The infected welcomed him, their gazes locking onto his with reverence. One woman, her dress torn and face streaked with blood, staggered to him and whispered through broken teeth, "Father." Adrian's heart froze. They didn't see him as a man anymore. They saw him as the beginning, the prophet of their plague. He wanted to scream that he hadn't meant for this, that it wasn't supposed to be this way. But the voice inside laughed, mocking him. "You wanted to change the world, and you have." By the second week, governments had fallen. Cities turned to ash, not by bombs or fire, but by silence. The kind of silence that followed when no one was left breathing. Adrian stood in the ruins of his laboratory, the only place that still felt like home. The storm outside had quieted. The world was his creation now, suffocating, broken, crawling with shadows of what once was. He looked at his own reflection one final time. The face staring back was no longer human. His grin stretched impossibly wide, his eyes black voids. The voice inside no longer felt separate. It was him. And in that moment, Adrian understood a truth that froze his blood. Carona was not an accident. It had been waiting, dormant, for someone to set it free. And now that it was free, it would never die. Years blurred into something unrecognizable. Time itself seemed to fracture, as if the world no longer cared to measure it. The skies grew sickly gray, a permanent dusk that bled into every corner of the earth. What survivors remained whispered of the Plague Father, a shadowed figure who roamed the ruins, watching, waiting, and sometimes smiling. They said when he appeared, the coughing followed. And when the coughing followed, entire towns vanished within days. Dr. Adrian Kessler no longer thought of himself as Adrian. His name belonged to the man who once dreamed of curing the world. That man had died when he injected the first vial into his veins. What remained was something else, a husk carrying a will greater than itself. The virus was no longer just inside him, it was him. It whispered in his marrow, sang in his bloodstream, throbbed behind his eyes. We are endless. We are legion. We are the future. And it was true, even when people thought it was gone. Carona always came back. Villages would rebuild, laughter would echo again, children would dare to play in the ruins. But then the air would change. It would grow heavy, damp, like a lung exhaling across the land. And within days, coughs would begin. First one, then many, then all. Entire bloodlines were erased in less than a week. It became a cycle, cruel and inevitable, like the turning of seasons. Adrian began to notice something far more terrifying. The virus wasn't just killing, it was learning. The infected no longer stumbled like mindless husks. They moved with intent. Their eyes glowed with strange intelligence. They whispered in languages long forgotten, chanting in unison as if worshiping something beyond human comprehension. When they looked at Adrian, they no longer called him father. They called him vessel. One night, in the ruins of a church overtaken by ivy and shadow, Adrian realized the virus wasn't just alive, it was waiting for something. The chanting of the infected swelled around him, their hollow voices merging into a single, thunderous cry that rattled the heavens. The world is the womb is ready. For the first time, Adrian felt fear, not for others, but for himself. The virus had never intended to stop with him. It had used him to escape, to learn, to grow. And now, it wanted to be born into something greater. Something that would not need hosts. Something that could breathe without lungs, spread without touch, exist without end. He looked into the mirror of a cracked church window and saw his reflection twist. His body stretched unnaturally thin, veins glowing faintly beneath his skin. His mouth split into a grin far wider than bone should allow. His eyes were no longer eyes, but pits of writhing black mist. He understood then. He was not the master. He was the doorway. As lightning struck the ruined steeple, the infected fell silent. They all turned to him, kneeling, trembling, waiting. And from his own mouth came words he did not choose, words that poured out in a voice not his own. Carona will never end. It is not a disease, it is the beginning. And when the world forgets, when the ashes settle, when silence dares to pretend it has won, Carona will rise again. The chanting resumed, louder, thunderous, shaking the earth beneath his feet. Adrian, or whatever remained of him, spread his arms wide as shadows poured from his body, black mist spiraling into the air like storm clouds. The infected screamed in ecstasy, their bodies convulsing, reshaping, merging into something monstrous and divine. And above the ruined world, the sky finally breathed. Carona was never gone. It was only sleeping. And when humanity dares to believe it is safe again, it will return, stronger, smarter, hungrier, forever.